outgoing Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro cut 50% of the resources allocated to the health sector by 2023. In Egypt, developing countries participating in the COP27 summit called for the loss and damage compensation, a fund to address the consequences of climate change. Russian President Vladimir Putin reiterated his country's readiness to provide grain and fertilizers to African countries for free. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. The 6th Conference on International Cooperation of the Association of Caribbean States will conclude on Friday in Havana, Cuba, with a debate focused on the fight against climate change and regional development. The conference discussed projects to mitigate the climate crisis, seek ways to economic development through intra-regional trade integration and improve connectivity. The association also seeks to promote sustainable tourism, which was affected by the health crisis. During the interventions, attendees presented specific initiatives which seek to reduce the impact of climate change on coastal erosion, improve the management and administration of waste in the sea, and analyze the migratory mobilization caused by global warming. The United Nations organization requests the government of the Dominican Republic to stop deportations of Haitian citizens to their country of origin. UN representatives informed that the armed violence and human rights violations in Haiti did not allow the safe, dignified, and sustainable return of citizens. They also stressed the call to all the countries of the region to stop the deportation of Haitians due to the crisis generated by the violence in the armed gangs in the Caribbean country. For his part, the spokesperson of the Dominican presidency, Homero Figueroa, indicated that his country deported 60,204 Haitians between August and October 2022 and emphasized that the operations were carried out following the lines of President Luis Abinader. In Panama, a local media's report warns of high poverty rates despite favorable macroeconomic indicators. The survey estimates that after COVID-19, Panama's general poverty rate stands at 25%, which affects 1.1 million Panamanians in a population of a little more than 4.2 million people. It also indicated that due to the worldwide inflation, the value of the basic family basket has increased in the last months. The figures reveal a wider social gap as Afro-descendants, women and farmers are hit the hardest, and emphasizes that 90% of native people in the countryside wards live in poverty. And the 8th meeting of the Puebla Group is taking place in Santa Marta, Colombia, focusing on the importance of building a progressive political integration agenda in Latin America. Under the slogan, "The Region United for Change," the meeting is attended by some 100 Latin American leaders from more than 10 countries. Lawfare was at the center of this Thursday session as attendees discuss how the legal wars are a reality and a constant to intimidate and limit progressive leaderships. So the Latin American Council for Justice and Democracy continues to advance in the denunciation and dissemination of these cases. In Argentina, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, denounces 20-year setback in women's participation in the workforce during the 5th Regional Women's Conference. The regional body denounced that the coronavirus pandemic triggered a setback in the labor participation levels of women in Argentina. It also assured that if policies to close the gender gaps were implemented, the gross domestic product will increase by up to 6.9% by 2030. The document resulted from a meeting of Latin American activists and officials who debated the origins, consequences, and solutions to the overburden of unpaid domestic and care work that mainly falls on women. In Brazil, outgoing President Jair Bolsonaro's government cut 50% of the resources allocated to the health sector by 2023. A survey by the Institute for Health Policy Studies shows a 50% cut in several health areas as part of the Bolsonaro administration's budget planning for 2023. The Brazilian Health Economics Associations stated that the cuts were motivated by the diversion of close to 20 million or billion Brazilian reals. According to the organization's data, while funds for parliamentary reforms increase, resources for social programs decrease. We'll take a short break, but first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at teleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news, updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Brazilian Institute for Special Research reported an increase in deforestation in the Amazon. According to the deforestation alerts released this Friday by the Institute, the accumulated alerts beat a new historical record with 904 kilometers of devastated forest for the month of October. And also, according to the information registered monthly by the Deforestation Detection System in real time, the devastation of the forest in the first 10 months of the year already surpassed the data of 2021, when 8,219 square kilometers of vegetation were razed. In Egypt, developing countries participating in the COP27 summit called for a loss and damage compensation fund to address the consequences of climate change. The most vulnerable nations to natural disasters caused by climate change, which are also the ones that release the least polluting elements, managed to include in the forum's agenda the issue of a loss and damage compensation fund to address the recovery of nations devastated by floods, landslides, storms, and other climate disasters. Officially, countries participating in the COP27 summit still have 2 years to negotiate this issue. On Friday, an earthquake of magnitude 7.3 struck in the sea around 200 kilometers from Tonga, prompting residents to move inland to higher ground. According to the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, a priorly issued tsunami advisory was lifted, but warnings remain for people in low-lying areas. The earthquake was at a depth of 24.8 kilometers that struck the sea at about 211 kilometers east of southeast of Niuefu, according to the United States Geological Survey. In January, the Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha volcano eruption triggered a tsunami that destroyed villages and resorts and knocked out communications for the South Pacific nation. At least 3 people were killed. Now we move on to other topics. Southeast Asian leaders began the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit in Cambodia on Friday, with Myanmar's political crisis expected to dominate discussions. Cambodia, this year's chair for the ASEAN, is hosting the weekend summit in Phnom Penh, in what is the group's first in-person meeting since the COVID-19 pandemic. The 10-nation bloc is made up of Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Myanmar, however, was not invited to this year's summit, following the military coup in 2021, which saw its elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi ousted from power. Leaders from the United States, China, South Korea, and Japan will also be meeting Asian leaders in Phnom Penh.
We are now at the most uncertain juncture. The lives of millions in our region depend on our wisdom and foresight, our right decisions and policies, and our realistic approach to address the strategic challenge we all face. There is a saying that disasters and crises can bring out the best in people. In this connection, I believe that all of us gathering here today share a sense of urgency to work together in addressing the above common challenge.
Ugandan authorities extended a 3-week lockdown on 2 districts at the center of an Ebola outbreak, which has claimed 53 lives, curbing travel and closing public places. Health Minister Ruth Jane Eisen said the lockdown of Mubende and Kazanda districts will be extended for another 21 days. The lockdown includes a dusk-to-dawn curfew, a ban on personal travel, and the closure of markets, bars, and churches. Since the outbreak was declared in the central district of Mubende on September 20th, the disease has spread across the East African nation, including the capital Kampala. The strain now circulating in Uganda is known as the Sudan Ebola virus, for which there is currently no vaccine, although there are several candidate vaccines heading towards clinical trials. In France, the 5th Forum for Peace is taking place this Friday in the capital of that nation, focusing this year on Latin American countries. The presidents of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, as well as the president of the National Assembly of Venezuela, Jorge Rodriguez, attend the event. Venezuelan officials advocated on Friday for the respect of the institutional framework and the suspension of all unilateral coercive measures against Venezuela as a way towards peace. The forum counts with outstanding personalities from different continents who will address global challenges, such as international conflicts, cyber crimes, and climate change. The president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, urged for change in world drug policy during the 5th Peace Forum in Paris. In his speech, the Colombian president insisted that drug consumption should be a public health issue, so he suggested that the resources that are invested in the war on drugs could be allocated to the prevention of drug intaking. President Gustavo Petro also stated that the war on drugs, which has left 1 million Latin Americans dead, is a sign that this policy has failed. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. A rescue ship carrying 230 people docked at the French port of Toulon amid a French-Italian dispute over which country is responsible for them. The Ocean Viking, operated by a French non-governmental organization, picked up the asylum seekers at sea near the Libyan coast before sending and spending weeks seeking a port to accept them. France had never before allowed the rescue vessels carrying from the Mediterranean to land on its coast, but did so this time because Italy had refused access. French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said the people were Italy's responsibility under European Union rules, and that the French government's move was an exceptional measure that will not guide future action. Family members and colleagues of assassinated Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh told United Nations investigators that she had been deliberately targeted as part of Israel's wide-scale war on Palestinian media workers. The killing of the veteran Al Jazeera reporter, who was wearing a bulletproof vest marked "Pressed" and a helmet when she was shot in the head during an army operation in Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank on May 11th, is the subject of one of the first of a series of public hearings at the UN. At the hearings, family members and colleagues demanded concrete accountability and justice for the crime. The hearings are being hosted by the Commission of Inquiry created by the UN Human Rights Council last year to probe the root causes of the decades-long Middle East conflict.
Israel killed Shirin Abu Akleh, and they tried to kill me and other colleagues in cold blood. We were standing in front of the Israeli soldiers, and they were looking at us the same way we were looking at them. However, they fired at us with the aim to kill us. The bullet they fired it here, but as I turned, the bullet hit me from behind. They shot Shirin Abu Akleh here. They could have aimed at her and hand or feet, but they wanted to kill her. We should expose the occupation and try whoever gave the green light to kill Shirin Abu Akleh.
In Uzbekistan, the city of Samarkand hosted the 9th summit of the Organization of Turkic States. The event, also known as the Summit of the Turkish-speaking countries, brought together the heads of state of Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Turkey, among others. The community, of which Hungary and Turkmenistan are observer members, has a population of more than 200 million people and significant energy potential, military development, and strategic transport routes. The union of this bloc of countries is a process that has been underway since the end of the Soviet Union, when representatives of the Central Asian countries that are in various ways related to the history and cultural tradition of Turkey were convened in Ankara. And now we move on to other topics. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin reiterated his country's readiness to provide grain and fertilizers to African countries for free. The president confirmed the announcement made by the Russian Ministry of Agriculture at the end of October regarding the shipment of 500,000 tons of grain to the poorest countries in Africa suffering from food shortages amid tensions over the conflict in Ukraine. The announcement followed the Kremlin's decision to halt the agreement on the export of Ukrainian grain brokered by Turkey after cargo ships flying the Russian flag were attacked by drones in waters off the humanitarian corridor. And China highly commended El Salvador for completely abolishing the so-called free trade agreement with the Taiwan region, which is where the greater national interests lies, and it's what the people desire, said Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian.
Of November 7 local time, the Constitutional Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice in El Salvador ordered the cessation of the effects of the protective measure for the so-called free trade agreement with Taiwan, which marks the complete abolition of the deal. In doing so, El Salvador has chosen to stand on the right side of history and made a decision that serves the fundamental and long-term interests of both countries. China highly appreciates that. This again shows that upholding the One China principle is an overriding trend that represents the overwhelming consensus of the world and enjoys popular support. This is a trend that no force can hold back.
Likewise, the spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that his country and El Salvador are ready to launch a bilateral free trade negotiation process as soon as possible and will make joint efforts for an early conclusion of the deal.
China and El Salvador jointly announced that the two sides are ready to launch bilateral free trade negotiation process as soon as possible and will make joint effort for an early conclusion of the deal. This speaks volumes about the shared desire of the two sides to deepen bilateral ties and upgrade economic and trade cooperation. In recent years, acting upon the common understanding reached between the two heads of state, China and El Salvador have broken new ground in the development of bilateral relations, delivered new outcomes in practical cooperation, and furthered dependent friendship. China stands ready to work with El Salvador to strengthen the momentum of growth in bilateral ties, fully tap into our potential, and foster new highlights in cooperation to create a better future for China-El Salvador relations.
And we have a disclaimer to announce. Our Facebook page has been hacked and currently displaying content out of our agenda and against our social, moral, political, and informative premises. We stress teleSUR English is not responsible for these posts that violate Facebook's community standards. We hope this company will give us back our credentials as soon as possible and resume our regular posts on that social network. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.